we're going to start of these 8 feelings. We're going to start with a good one. They're all good.
A good one,
because they're all good. Oh, but man, this one's hurt. Okay, and just a reminder again, we're going to use some language, but I want to simplify or kind of give a biblical context for the language we're going to use. So we're going to talk about the feeling itself with each feeling. We're going to do this with hurt in a second. We're going to talk about the impairment, what happens when we try to refuse the vulnerability of that feeling. We're going to talk about the gift of actually walking through the doorway or getting into the inner tube in the river of that feeling. And then the need that we have that meets. And you're going to see this, that in all the impairments, it's about isolation, power, and being alone. A biblical words for that, or you just call it the flesh, carnality. It's where we get into sin. And these are the things that we get into trouble on, that truthfully, most of the reasons why we have a problem with feelings, okay? But to the right side of that, when you move into the vulnerability, you walk through the doorway of the vulnerability of the confession of that feeling, and you're going to find that there are gifts that you receive and needs that are met. And a biblical frame for that is going to be, this is John 15. This is what it looks like to abide. This is what it looks like to trust. This is what it looks like to surrender. This is what it looks like to be vulnerable and connected with each other and with God. And so we're going to use those words and those categories, but really it's a biblical category, and there's biblical framework underneath those. So this first one for hurt, okay? The impairment, and Phil's going to develop this, the impairment for hurt is going to be resentment and revenge. You can almost feel that. You move to the vulnerability of hurt, it's going to be healing and courage are going to be the gifts. And the need is attention.
Yeah, thanks for that map, Jeff. So let's, for another way of saying it, let's just break the chart down, teach a little bit about what each of these elements mean. So we'll follow the same pattern through all these videos to help you. I'll start with that. If you see the chart on that middle column where it says truth. And so the first one's hurt. And, there's an old saying, as a matter of fact, it was a book way back years ago called Hurt People, Hurt People. And that is true. And hurt people do hurt people, and hurt people hurt. So we're using that word a lot. But here's what happens. It's really even in your brain. When we feel hurt, it registers in the same part of the brain that physical hurt registers in. I want you to pay attention to the euphemisms we use to describe emotional hurt: a punch in the gut, a slap in the face, a stab in the back. Think about how badly those things would hurt physically. Well, they hurt that way emotionally, that we're fearfully, wonderfully made, the psalmist writes in Psalm 139. And so part of the evidence of that is how even our language conveys what we're feeling emotionally through physical examples. So hurt is simply this feeling that says, I've been wounded relationally and it hurts deeply. I like to use this metaphor for hurt. It's as if hurt stands at a gate, and when we walk up to say, hey, I want to enjoy this deeper life of feeling, hurt says, are you willing to have me? If you're willing to have me, then you can walk into these other feelings really well, because hurt is the one we want to stay away from. Back to the physical example, when we touch a hot stove, we want to never do that again. And so when we hurt emotionally, I want to never do that again. I don't want to attach again. I don't want to trust again. I don't want to commit again. I don't want to hurt. So our body's made to be repelled by hurt, and we're repelled by hurt emotionally too. However, when we name that, I'm hurting, and we explore, we investigate, what does this remind me of now? How did my friend or my wife or my husband or whomever, how did they hurt me? How do I feel hurt now? And then what does it remind me of in my own story? Where does this come from, this intensity of this? As we do that, as we work through hurt, naming it, investigating it, and then expressing it, this gift is revealed to us. It's a natural occurrence, and it's called healing and courage. We're able to show up again relationally, not in spite of the hurt, even in light of the hurt. Where hurt's walking alongside us into this deeper experience of relationship and saying, just hurt well, and this gift called healing will come your way, and this courage will come your way, courage to keep standing in relationship even amidst the hurt. The word courage, by the way, is where we get our word heart for like coronary, C-O-R, the root word of courage. And then what's revealed in the doing of that, in the working through hurts, what's revealed is this great need we have for attention. And Jeff, I know you have a story with one of your own sons that has to do with such a beautiful illustration of what we're talking about.
Well, what I love about what you're saying, I'll tell a story. What I love about what you're saying is stuff does happen, and it is the truth. Now, my feelings don't always tell the truth about what's happening, but what I'm feeling is the truth about what's happening with me.
Yeah.
So that's why we even call that truth, okay? One of my mentors, she said to me once, she said, Jeff, if your hurt doesn't matter, you don't matter.
Yeah.
Which is why this whole thing about attention, the need is attention. As a dad, I've got 6 kids. I have kissed a million boo-boos, okay? And you know, kid runs up, you know, sometimes their legs half fallen off, but sometimes it's just a little bitty little owie on their knee. But what they needed was they needed attention. They needed for me to care about their hurt. In some ways, to honor their hurt. Doesn't matter how big it is, because by the way, the brain doesn't care whether it's big or small, it's just hurt.
Yes.
And emotional hurt and physical hurt register in the same place in the brain. It's just hurt, and someone needs to care about my hurt and pay attention to me. I remember, you know, I grew up in my mom raised 6 kids on $100 a week. So, you know, we could make a nickel go a year, you know. But I remember so that's how cheap I was, and how my kids still tell stories about how I even was raising them early on. But I remember when one of my sons came to me, and he wanted a Band-Aid on an owie, and I looked at his leg, okay. And it didn't need anything, truthfully. Come on now. You know, my tendency, this is before any of this my tendency would have been like to send him back out there. Come on, rub some dirt on it, go, kid. You're not hurt, right? And it's so funny because we think we want to make our kids tough, but really we're making them weak because they're not resilient. But anyway, he came to me with all this hurt, and he wanted attention. And he asked me for a Band-Aid. And I remember thinking, that Band-Aid costs money. I'm not going to waste a Band-Aid on that boy's knee. Well, it was probably 1/100th of a penny. Doesn't matter. But I remember being so hesitant to put a Band-Aid on it. And then I remember in that moment catching myself around this principle and thinking, no, Jeff, put a Band-Aid on that boy's knee. Because for the rest of the day, as long as that Band-Aid is still on that knee, even from me putting it on there, and then him looking back and seeing it on there, he may not be conscious of this, but his body is saying, even in his subconscious, I mattered. My dad attended to my hurt, cares about me, paid attention to me, and put a Band-Aid on it. And that Band-Aid represents something. In fact, when that began to be true, when I began to experience this and think deeply about it, I thought, listen, I would cover that kid in Band-Aids for him to know I care about him. Now, we think that's going to make him soft and weak. Truthfully, it's the opposite.
That's right.
Go back to courage. If that boy can go out there and be hurt and then know he has a place to come back to with the hurt, that somebody is going to put a Band-Aid on it, somebody's going to hear him, care for him, now he has the courage to go back out and get hurt again.
Yes.
But if he came to me and I shamed him for it, I minimized it, tried to talk him out, you're like, oh, suck it up, kid. Go be a man, you 8-year-old. You know? Now I've sent a kid out there to be weak. And to not know how to, or tough, he becomes weak trying to be tough. Does that make sense? So, gosh, attention. And I don't care whether you're 8 or 88. Someone needs to pay attention to my hurt.
Yeah, that's right. It was a powerful story. It's so illustrative too, Jeff, of the acuity level, how severe something is. It really doesn't matter. It's being attended to. And there's it's often children are disruptive in a classroom, for example. They'll say, well, he or she just wants attention, even negative attention. Well, the human heart doesn't make a distinction between negative attention or positive attention, because the word attention means to be attended to. So you attended to his heart with a Band-Aid on his knee. It's a beautiful story. And so if we work across that way, so to speak, and land in this revelation, this revealing of the need for attention, and we're in relationships of intimacy where we can be attended to by our admission of hurt. There's a beautiful gift we receive. If we don't do that, if we are insistent or been raised in a place that says, no, you do rub dirt on it, you do get tough, you don't worry about it, it's not a big deal, that we move into this territory called resentment, and what Jeff labeled as the impairment on the chart that you see in the study. And what resentment means, it can be thought of as a rescinding. If you do a play on words, it's a rescinding of the offense, the rescinding of the hurt. And so I get powerful by keeping my feelings internal and not recognizing that I'm hurt and vulnerable. And it hardens into this thing called resentment, where I may be smiling on the outside. I may appear to be really conciliatory with you, but internally I'm harboring this resentment because I'm rescinding how offended I am by what you did or said with me or neglect of me. If that stays long enough unaddressed, it hardens even further into this highly isolated place called revenge. And that's where life doesn't become about being attended to. It becomes about me attending to my own heart through plotting the demise of another person. It brings us into a place of fantasy and making up stories that empower us, which actually just decays us from the inside out. And so to review, the hurt is a feeling that says, I've been wounded. I've been wounded relationally. And I name that, I investigate that, and I express that in safe relationships. I receive this gift as an outcome of that called healing and courage to show back up, which reveals a need to me to be attended to, which is a beautiful gift in the body of Christ and in relationships and et cetera. But if I don't, I move into these really lonely, isolated places called resentment and revenge.
Yeah. We see this all through the New Testament. We see when people are hurting. You watch it even with Jesus, the way he interacts with people, the way that they knew they could bring that to him, and how he responded to them.
Yeah.
It was so different than anything they experienced, even in quote unquote all those other religious settings that they had been in. And there was something about him that was an absolute invitation. Which, by the way, we're going to talk about this later, but Jesus was fully God and fully man, which means he had all these feelings. He had them, and we see them, and they show up, and we want to be like Jesus. Well, we're going to have these feelings, and one of them is going to be hurt. And hurt is a really vulnerable, it may not be the most vulnerable on here. We'll talk about that later, but it's vulnerable because I say, you have the power. Someone else has the power to hurt me, which is why I go to the resentment and the revenge, because I'm going to be powerful again to keep you and then anybody else from being able to do that to me again.
That's right.
And we think we can move on from those things, and we just push them down. Yeah. But when we push them down, we store them. And then we lack the resilience to deal with more hurt.
Yes.
When even somebody else. So I can be in an interaction with my wife today, and it really has nothing to do, well, something to do with what happened with us, more to do with what I've never dealt with.
Yeah.
We always say if it's hysterical, it's historical. If what happens big here is bigger than the moment, that means there's a whole lot here that's still in there. And again, we can talk more about that. But
yeah. So we start out with one that's, like you said, Jeff, kind of comes out of the gate pretty strong to talk about in these videos. But it's so important that we recognize that life is going to hurt. Humans are going to hurt one another, and marriage and raising children and friendships and partnerships of all kinds. It is inherent in them that human beings interacting are going to hurt one another, and our ability to attend to that hurt and attend to one another is really huge. So this hurt, beginning with hurt, as we kind of walk through these feelings, is really, it seems intuitively wrong, because why would you start with that one for? But it's so important to know that being able to deal healthfully with hurt gives us that resilience you were talking about earlier, Jeff. So that resilience and staying power in relationship is very, very important.